One fort, one river, one catastrophic mistake. In February of 1862, a short, violent clash along the Tennessee River shattered the Confederate defensive line in the West. It also launched the career of a general who would one day command the entire Union Army. This is the story of the Battle of Fort Henry, a battle decided not just by soldiers, but by strategy, technology, and the unstoppable power of rising water. By early 1862, the American Civil War was approaching its first critical turning point. In the Eastern Theater, massive armies stared each other down across Virginia, locked in a stalemate. But in the West, a different kind of war was unfolding, one that would be decided by rivers. The Tennessee and Cumberland rivers weren't just bodies of water, they were the highways of the 19th century. They carried troops, supplies, food, and heavy artillery deep into enemy territory. If the Union could seize control of these waterways, they could punch a hole straight through the Confederate heartland. To stop that from happening, the Confederacy constructed a chain of forts stretching across Tennessee and Kentucky. Among them was Fort Henry, built to guard the vital Tennessee River for the Union. Breaking this line became a top priority. The task fell to two men who would soon become household names. The first was Brigadier General Ulysses S. Grant at the time. He was relatively unknown, but he possessed an aggressive, relentless determination that set him apart. The second was Flag Officer Andrew H. Foote, a veteran naval officer in command of a new and dangerous weapon, Ironclad river gunboats. Together they planned a combined army and navy assault that would test a brand new style of warfare. The problem was, Fort Henry was flawed from the very beginning. Its location was a disaster. It was built on low, swampy ground right on the river's edge, making it terribly vulnerable to flooding. As fate would have it, heavy winter rains had already swollen the Tennessee River, turning the fort's dry ground into a swamp and its trenches into waterlogged ditches inside the fort. The situation was grim. Confederate troops were poorly equipped, struggling with outdated weapons, soaked ammunition, and collapsing morale as the water levels rose around them. The fort's commander, Brigadier General Lloyd Tillman, was a realist. He looked at the rising water, the approaching Union force, and his own desperate situation, and he understood the cold, hard truth: Fort Henry could not be held. It was indefensible. So, Tillman made a painful but strategically necessary decision. He ordered the vast majority of his men, over 2,000 soldiers, to abandon the fort immediately. Their new orders were to march 10 miles east to Fort Donelson, a much stronger position on the Cumberland River that sat on higher ground and was far better defended. Tillman himself stayed behind with a small force of artillerymen, not to win, but to delay. His goal was to fight just long enough to buy time for his army to escape. In early February, the Union forces began their advance. Grant's infantrymen started their march toward the fort, but the very terrain that doomed Fort Henry now worked against them. The same floodwaters had turned the roads into rivers of mud, slowing their progress to a frustrating crawl. The Navy, however, had no such problem. On the morning of February 6, 1862, Flag Officer Foote's flotilla steamed upriver. 7 gunboats led the charge. The core of his fleet consisted of 4 ironclads, innovative vessels armored with thick iron plating that could deflect cannon fire. They were supported by 3 older wooden gunboats. As the fleet rounded the final bend in the river, Fort Henry came into view. Moments later, the bombardment began. The Union gunboats opened fire, their heavy cannons sending massive shells crashing into the fort's earthen walls and gun positions. The Confederate artillerymen, standing in knee-deep water, answered back bravely. For over an hour, the two sides exchanged ferocious fire at close range. The battle was intense. One Union ironclad, the USS Essex, took a direct hit to its boiler. The resulting explosion sent scalding steam tearing through the ship, severely wounding its captain and many of its crew. But the other ironclads pressed forward relentlessly, their armor absorbing shot after shot as they closed the distance. Inside the fort, conditions were rapidly deteriorating from bad to impossible. Floodwater now covered large parts of the parade ground. Some of the gun platforms were completely submerged. Gunpowder was getting wet and useless. One by one, Confederate cannons were knocked out of action by the superior Union firepower. Tillman saw that further resistance was futile. His men had done all they could. Before Grant's infantry could even arrive on the battlefield, Tillman gave the order to raise the white flag of surrender. Fort Henry had fallen to the Union Navy. The battle was over almost as quickly as it had begun. Union casualties were light. While the number of Confederate losses was also minimal, the strategic consequence was catastrophic. With Fort Henry captured, the Tennessee River was now wide open. Union gunboats surged southward, pushing deep into Confederate territory for the first time. They destroyed bridges, captured supply vessels, and disrupted the critical rail lines that fed the Southern armies. For the first time in the war, the Union had decisively broken through a major Confederate defensive barrier. Just as importantly, the fall of Fort Henry completely exposed its sister fort, Fort Donelson. Grant wasted no time. Within days, his forces moved against Donelson, setting the stage for a battle that would end with the surrender of an entire Confederate army and elevate Grant to national fame as Unconditional Surrender Grant. The significance of Fort Henry can't be measured by casualties alone. It was a battle of firsts. It was the first major Union victory in the Western theater. It was a stunning demonstration of the devastating power of ironclad warships, forever changing naval warfare, and it was definitive proof that close coordination between the Army and the Navy could win battles quickly and decisively. Most of all, the capture of Fort Henry marked the moment when the Union seized the momentum in the West, a momentum it would never fully surrender for the rest of the war. A poorly placed fort, rising in a bold Union attack, had changed the course of the conflict. Fort Henry fell in a single afternoon, but its impact would reshape the American Civil War. If you want more stories where small decisions create massive historical consequences, make sure to subscribe to the channel, because next, we follow Grant to the battle that truly shook the Confederacy to its core. The fight for Fort Donelson, where the war in the West would be transformed forever. Thanks for watching.